Welcome back to another episode of Swamp Stories. For this episode, we cover an insane story that the world needs to know about. But before we get into it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. You can also follow the Instagram page as well. So let's get into it. In order to really explain this video, it's going to require a lot of background information. So if you like geography, sociology, or history, you're in for a good time today. And with that being said, let's head all the way back to 80 years ago. The 1940s. By this time, San Francisco was already pretty much built to capacity. With 630,000 residents in 7 square miles, this made San Francisco the second most densely populated city in America. However, in 1942, a large influx of people had to find somewhere to live. And by now, most people know the story. But for those who don't, in 1942, San Francisco opened the second largest Navy shipyard on the West Coast. And at this time, the city was already wealthier than most of America, so most of the locals were not going to work on the shipyards. Instead, thousands of desperate workers from Louisiana gladly moved out to San Francisco, and the first group of residents were able to purchase homes in the city's bottom right corner, known as Hunters Point. And by law, this was one of the only neighborhoods where they were allowed to buy homes. So once these homes filled up, the city had a crisis and needed to provide housing. And in response, the Federal Housing Department turned parkland into thousands of public housing units. First came the Sunnydale project, located in the Visitation Valley neighborhood. This became endless rows of identical apartments that go all the way up the hill. Then came Hunters Point, which became flooded with over a dozen public housing complexes. And over the 1940s and 50s, the city's dynamics started to change. Listen to this, in 1940, San Francisco was 95% white, which is actually kind of misleading because at the time, Asian fell under the white category, and so did Hispanic, oddly enough. But the point is that San Francisco was 0.8% African American. That was a grand total of 4,800 people. Well, by the end of the 1960s, that number jumped to 96,000, which put them at 14% of the population. And throughout this time period, San Francisco had a 100% employment rate and had virtually zero crime of any sort. In fact, many would have considered it America's safest city. But the start of the 1970s is where everything fell apart. And it all began when the city's two biggest housing projects became bitter rivals. Sunnydale versus Hunters Point. The madness has never stopped since. This is the real deal. But before we get into it, let me run the intro. In 1970, Sunnydale and Hunters Point became major rivals, and according to old rumors, it all started over a girl. Literally every single day during this time was chaos. And if you don't believe me, check out the numbers. In 1971, San Francisco had a homicide rate of 28 per 100,000. That was more than triple the national average. And to put it into context, that's the same rate as current day Chicago. So because of this, the next major change would come, starting in the 1980s. Many residents of the city's worst areas decided that they didn't want to raise their families in this bad environment. So thousands of people who had the means to leave decided to go far away. They knew the chance of their children getting involved in the neighborhood rivalries was high. So they sold their houses and moved out to Vallejo, Fairfield, and even Sacramento. And for those of you old enough to remember, you could buy a 2-story house in a brand new neighborhood for under $100,000. So because of the movement, the city's dynamics started to change. Here's how it played out. By the year 2000, San Francisco's African American population dropped to just 7%. This is half of what it was in 1980. And that takes us to the gentrification era, which many say started at the millennium. So let me do my best to break down the streets of San Francisco. In almost every American city, the hood is considered anything that's low income and has activities going on. But in the new San Francisco, the hood is only the projects. That's because every house in San Francisco is worth more than $1 million. So if you grow up in a house or a market rate apartment, chances are your parents make a lot of money. There are software engineers at Google that live directly across the street from the projects. So on one side of the street, you have people making $500K a year, and on the other side, you have families that earn less than the national poverty line. The wealth gap is insane in San Francisco, so it makes for an extremely unique dynamic. There's really two San Franciscos, the projects and the houses, and for the most part, these communities do not interact. So overall, violent crime in the city is lower than most American cities. However, within the community of projects, it is absolutely wild and never-ending chaos. There are project rivalries all over the city, but none are bigger than the one in this video. So let's finally get into it. The Sunnydale projects are basically split up into 3 sections. You have 42 in the low, both of which I covered in my very first video. And up until just a few years ago, these were pretty much the most feared in the city. They virtually emptied out an entire rival section in under 10 years. But over the past few years, the historically forgotten about section of Sunnydale has gained major prominence. Let me introduce you to 3400 BLYTHEDALE, also known as the 4. Interestingly enough, this section of Sunnydale consists of mostly Samoan residents, and for those of you who aren't familiar, they originated from the tiny island of Samoa in the Pacific Ocean. And one thing about them is that they tend to be very big, and not like eating big, more like NFL big. Pretty much everyone is over 6 feet and at least 250 pounds. They also have a very strong culture of family, pride, and toughness that has instilled fear in the Bay Area for a long time. If you ever played Pop Warner football, trust me, you know what I'm talking about. However, they never had any sort of presence in the streets. Instead, they were more so a giant family that nobody messed with. Well, in 2012, the unthinkable would take place. And that takes us to the bottom of Hunters Point, also known as the Double Rock Projects. For years, this was the most feared project in the whole city. You had to enter through a gate and it was only one way in and one way out. So if you made the wrong move, it was probably over for you. In fact, delivery drivers and even SFPD refused to enter the gates. That being said, Double Rock always had a good relationship with the Samoans and tensions were never built. But after a silly argument, all that would fall apart. July 20th, 2012. A man named Henry Taulolo gets into an argument with his friend named Demarie Young, also known as D3. And for whatever reason, the situation elevates and D3 takes it to a whole new level. This shattered the Double Rock community and all relations were done. It got to the point where the Samoan residents of Double Rock moved over to Sunnydale and Alemany projects. And over the next few years, there were multiple serious incidents, including the 2014 passing of Double Rock member Latrell Shaw at the hands of Sunnydale man Fotu Paupau. However, everything would come to a complete halt for the time being. That's because in late 2014, the city of San Francisco decided to demolish the entire Double Rock project. And here's how it worked out. The city is legally required to provide housing to these old residents. However, moving into another project can be a bad idea because of how the rivalries work. So instead, the city offers the residents housing vouchers, which allows them to choose private housing and maintain their old rent. But San Francisco landlords were not going for this, and neither was Oakland, Richmond, San Leandro, and pretty much anywhere in the Bay Area. That would be except for Antioch, California, located about an hour east of San Francisco. At this point, Antioch had built endless suburban neighborhoods, but nobody was moving there. It was simply too far for Bay Area commuters. And for those of you from Southern California, you can compare this to Palmdale or Victorville. Brand new, beautiful suburban communities were left half empty. So the landlords got desperate and started accepting all the housing vouchers. And as a result, a large portion of Double Rock residents began moving out to Antioch, and Double Rock was officially vacated. And that takes us to 2016. To the new Double Rock, now known as the Alice Griffith Apartments. Over 150 brand new luxury style units available for the previous residents to move back in. Fortunately, when everyone got back, the rivalry had calmed down and nothing serious was going on. However, a small portion of the previous residents never let their harsh feelings go, and that resulted in multiple squabbles in downtown San Francisco. Sunnydale versus Double Rock was sadly coming back, but this time the difference is that it's all high schoolers. And it all got serious on October 19th, 2016. That's when 2 Double Rock teenagers from Mission High School drove down to June Jordan High School to confront Sunnydale in the parking lot. However, things got heated and Double Rock took it to a whole new level. Bam! Thankfully, everyone was okay, and 2 days later, the Double Rock teenagers went down. However, they all received under 3 years. In fact, one of them, nicknamed Rooster, says that he was let out immediately due to his plans to attend college. The judge noticed his academic potential and let him go. But either way, this was the first incident that made everyone tighten up, like, oh wow, this is getting serious. So in response, 3400 Sunnydale started a new group called TEARITOFF. Let me introduce you to the important members. Most importantly, you have Reno Fiapoto, also known as TEARITOFF GREASY. And this guy is the alpha male of the entire operation and is known to instill fear in everyone. And by his side is his brother Rasas, also known as TEARITOFF Sauce Bang. And this guy is the brains behind everything. He just knows how to land on large portions of money, let me put it like that. Then you have TEARITOFF GUTTA. This guy is the wildest one by far. Like, trust me, you do not want to make this guy mad. That's pretty much the original guys from Sunnydale, and they throw up a 4 to represent their block. But TEARITOFF expands past Sunnydale, and the first section to join up was the Alamany Projects. And from there you have Lil Lar, who's a rapper who's hit over 500,000 views. And also from there you have another guy named TEARITOFF Joaquin. And altogether, TEARITOFF was not focused on rivalries. Instead, stacking up money, snatching chains, and being the biggest bullies in the Bay Area was their mission. So early on, they snatched the chain of Alabama rapper OMB Peasy. And while in high school, TEARITOFF members could be seen with hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash. And according to federal investigators, it all came from what they call crams. However, in 2017, one of their crams would go terribly wrong. By this time, Sauce Bang, Greasy, and most of TEARITOFF have moved out to Antioch, California. And they happen to be attending Freedom High, a suburban school in nearby Oakley. So despite living in the suburbs, their cramming ways do not stop. October 25th, 2017, Sauce Bang drives around Antioch looking for money, and on 10th Street he runs into a man named SCIPIO Spears. Unfortunately, things get tricky and Sauce Bang takes it to a whole new level. This wouldn't be solved for quite some time and the TEARITOFF madness continued, and that takes us to February 2nd, 2018. TEARITOFF Greasy decides to head down to the peninsula despite being on ankle monitor. Well, of course, before going, he decided to tear it off. And for those who don't know, this is a very upscale part of the Bay Area. 11 a.m. Greasy arrives at the Millbrae Pancake House, and outside is a couple with a purse and a note bag. So Greasy hops out of the car and completes the cram. He then drives away. Well, 11 months later, SFPD took down TEARITOFF. 5 arrests with all kinds of incidents all over the Bay Area. But for some reason, the district attorney decided to settle most of these cases. And as a result, TEARITOFF returned to the streets in 2020. And here is where the madness starts. In early 2020, social media tension started to rise between TEARITOFF and Double Rock. And Double Rock was the first to kick everything off. April 28th, 2020, TEARITOFF Greasy's youngest brother Reno Jr., also known as BR, is driving from Oakland to San Francisco. Driving with him is TEARITOFF GUTTA. Well, little do they know, a car full of Double Rock teenagers has been following them across the bridge. So right as they pass Treasure Island, the cars end up side by side. Bam. This is the moment that changed everything in the Bay Area. Double Rock and everyone they're cool with started clowning on Instagram for days after this, and this is when some new characters came out of the woodworks. A rapper named DREAMLLIFE RIZZY started putting out songs completely dissing BR and TEARITOFF, and he's honestly a really talented rapper, but this would still be a terrible decision. That's because TEARITOFF would not take it lightly. But first, they would go on one final mission for money, and this time it was Sauce Bang. On May 10th, 2020, he crammed a local store in Oakland and ended up with $300,000 in cash. And all this money would allow TEARITOFF to focus on one thing and one thing only, taking down Double Rock. And it all began on July 7th, 2020. The whole Double Rock is outside on their main block at 11 p.m. and that's when a car pulls up. Bang. March 16th, 2021, Double Rock's Derrick McDougal, also known as TG, is driving in Richmond, California. This is a small city located about 30 minutes northeast of San Francisco. And being that he's outside of the city, he feels comfortable being out and about. Unfortunately, that's not the case. A car pulls right beside him. Bang. just a few days later, TEARITOFF GREAZZY would go down for it. However, the case would be dropped due to lack of evidence. And despite the investigations, TEARITOFF decides to do something wild for the 1-year anniversary of BR. On April 29th, 2021, they shut down the Bay Bridge, threw money, and recorded a music video. They just do not care one bit, and of course, somehow they got away with this. And that takes us to May 25th, 2021. At this point, Double Rock is everywhere but the city, but they can't go far enough. And on the morning of May 25th, Chris Cawthorn, also known as Kojak, is walking on Broadway Street in Oakland. And that's when a black Sprinter van pulls up. And here is where everything starts to change. Everyone surrounding this situation had to choose a side. Point blank period. TEARITOFF pretty much said you're either with us or against us. And here's how it played out. Harbor and Kirkwood decided to join Double Rock, and that includes the rappers Swervy Bands and the Money Twins. On the other hand, an unexpected neighborhood would join TEARITOFF. Let me introduce you to the Excelsior, also known as the E. For a long time, this has been a middle-class area and rarely sees any sort of issues. Sure, every once in a while something will happen, but the Excelsior holds zero weight in the Bay Area streets. However, they're represented by a young rapper named K Smigs, and once he got together with TEARITOFF, the Double Rock side was not happy. So Double Rock rapper DREAMLLIFE RIZZY made a song mocking K Smigs' little brother who unfortunately passed away in a car crash. Well, the Excelsior was not happy about this. And that takes us to April 1st, 2022. Rapper Money Twin Dre is hanging out on 3rd and Paloux in the Bayview, but that's when a car pulls up. Bang. Instantly, the entire Double Rock, Kirkwood, and Harbor side is infuriated, especially because this isn't supposed to happen. So just 2 days later, they would seek revenge. April 3rd, 2022. K Smigs is playing pickup basketball at his neighborhood park, and that's when a car pulls up. The guys get out and run onto the court. This incident went viral on No Jumper and saddened many in the community. K Smigs was a talented rapper and was starting to make some noise. And some of you may be wondering how I know all about this. Well, both sides tell all of this in their music and on their Instagram stories. So if you're curious, go check out TEARITOFF GREAZZY and DREAMLLIFE RIZZY's music. But hopefully this is the end of the madness, especially because the Sunnydale projects are on their last days, literally. By the end of 2023, the entire Sunnydale will be demolished and rebuilt into luxury style condos, and so will Potrero Hill and various other projects. And that leaves me with one final message. All of this for what? None of this will matter once these areas are no longer the hood and everyone is living in Antioch. With that being said, I hope everyone stays blessed and treats life with more respect. And that's gonna do it for this episode of Swamp Stories. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Peace!